It's I don't think Mark and I really thought about that we were planning this on the day that we honor Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, but here we are.
You have to do one.
And
Yeah, I just always figured out how I can. Oh yeah, there you go.
thanks. Yeah, it just seems just right for us to be together on this day. That we were planning this on the.
You
That's okay. You know, what's a program without a few Zoom glitches here and there?
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Sort of reminds us that we're doing this new, not even new anymore, but this hybrid routine at Common Ground. Almost most programs are offered this way because we've become such a bigger community over the past 3 years, and including not just an in-person component, but also a virtual group too. Hey, Mark, do you see that Lucy is offering, maybe you don't see that, but Lucy's offering to help mute people if you want to make Lucy a co-host. It'd be great. Yeah. And so doing some community building on this day, just to remember that we're all one big community wherever we're zooming in from, either here in Minneapolis or Costa Rica, where Charlie is, and other places all over the world. Yeah. So just welcome to everybody, and deep welcome to each and every one of you. I'm so glad to be here with you tonight, and I know Mark is too. So just to kind of give us a little overview of how we'll spend the time, I'll have a few opening comments here, and then I'll guide us in a little bit of a 30-minute meditation period, just because that's our bedrock here at Common Ground, practicing together like this. And then Mark will offer some Dharma reflection, and then we will both field questions, reflections from the room. And then we'll see how long that takes, and perhaps that will take us up to 9 o'clock, or perhaps we'll end a little bit sooner. We'll just see how things go. But just to continue with my opening comments for a moment longer, just to reflect that this community is beautiful and thriving. And so many times I've mentioned that to Mark, since he hasn't been in person with us all, very often and over the past month. But even, I don't know, you probably remember that, Mark, when you were in the hospital, I would visit Mark daily or almost daily, and just remind him what a beautiful community that we have here at Common Ground, and how vibrant it feels and alive. And each program that I'm at, whether I'm teaching or participating, it feels like that to me these days. So just all of us practicing the Dharma and just returning for the Dharma again and again and again. I just feel so grateful to live my life in this way and to be walking this path with all of you. So with that, why don't we just sit together? Why don't we? You can close your eyes and get settled into a posture that feels suitable enough for sitting for the next half hour. Just resting into the experience we're having in this moment. Not looking for more perfect conditions. but accepting the way it is right now for each of us. Feeling into this embodied experience. And this heartful experience, the sensitive body and the sensitive heart. Caring enough to get close to the way it is. Caring enough to feel and receive. Setting aside any instinct to manipulate or control experience. We know the present moment through the experience of body and heart. Trusting each and every movement of nature as a teacher. Learning how to relate with wisdom and love. It's just this movement of nature, this movement of life, a lawful occurrence. No need to resist or to hold on. Relaxing. Allowing the heart to be steadied by this moment to moment, receiving with wisdom and love. Opening your eyes, coming back into the space with everyone when you're ready. Thanks for being here once again. Grateful to be here with Mark and to have this opportunity for Mark to share some of his experience along this health crisis that he's been in, this healing journey, and to share how he's been practicing and living and practicing and practicing. And that's specific to us for tonight, but Mark and I are also hoping that this will become an annual program where the guiding teachers, we come together and maybe have a conversation with one another about our vision for common ground and share some teaching perhaps, and just respond to questions and inquiries from the community. So hopefully this will be a launching point for many other beautiful evenings like this together. Without further ado, I'll pass it on to my dear friend and colleague.
Shelly. So nice to be with everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. My voice is a little weak, but put something in the chat if there's a problem, and Shelly and I will make some adjustments. First, I guess what comes to mind is just the love and support that has been offered, just people's good wishes, and through the Caring Bridge site and emails and communicated through Shelly and others. I really feel it, and it really helps. And I'm grateful to be part of the community and just to be in the circle of love. I felt so tenderized by the whole process, and I won't go into the specific details, but like Shelly mentioned, we thought it would be a good idea for the two of us to come together once a year and just have a community meeting around Dharma. And given what's been going on with me, it seems like, and this is a topic, of course, not exclusive to me, that things change, and uncertainty is the one certainty. And so it seems like a nice theme, both for that talk tonight and then the Q&A time with Shelly and myself afterward. But let me just say, just in case people are concerned, even though I am weak and I'm in the middle of I don't know if we call it a crisis but it's a serious situation that I have to really bring my attention to for sure, and have an amazing team of specialists and all of that. I'm okay, and I have a lot of support, and so I want people to know that, like, I wouldn't be here tonight if I wasn't okay, or if this wasn't the appropriate thing for me to be doing and in front of the group. It was really good to be here with everyone. And although my body is about 15 to 20% lighter, and who knows what else I've lost along the way, my mind seems relatively clear, but you could be the judge of that. We'll see how it goes. I mentioned earlier in the fall, maybe some of you caught the talk, a famous poem by a famous Japanese poet, Isa, maybe a couple hundred years ago. And if you don't know much about him, besides being well known as a Zen poet, he had a difficult life, lost a lot of children, wives, parents, of course, and just difficulties that can come through aging, sickness, and death, and all the other things that happen to us humans. And he wrote this short haiku that just, to me, it really speaks to this bringing into balance the two, what we might think as sides of the world that should be in conflict. That there is this, he says, this world of do, when you think of a drop of dew on water, pretty fragile. This world of dew is a world of dew, and yet, and yet. And this particular translation, it just kind of speaks to this place of no conflict, like we could see how ephemeral, how much we don't know. And it's okay to be touched by that too, like to be moved by that same experience. Sometimes in Buddhist practice or just in a superficial understanding of Buddhism, we might think of, and there are these similes, like a rock that doesn't get moved, a mountain that isn't moved by the wind or something like that. But there's something about that image that's true, that there is something that can remain balanced. But it doesn't mean that the heart doesn't feel or isn't touched or isn't moved. And that's kind of, for me, with this whole medical health adventure, crisis, whatever, is the interesting thing is about the kind of exposure and vulnerability, and how the two can exist, the balance and the peace. I mean, I'm not claiming perfect balance and peace, of course, but the relative balance and peace and stability and good-heartedness, and like things exploding and, radically changing, and huge unknowns and uncertainties, and making choices and without perfect information, and all that comes with these kind of crises. And probably large, well, who knows what percent, but I'm not alone in this group of people who have navigated, whether it was a terrible divorce or a financial crisis or some other kind of family challenge, difficulty, that it feels like the world gets turned inside out. And I think this has a lot to do with our practice. One way to think about the topic for tonight, just because it's up for us, not just for me, but even for Shelly, just because Shelly's had a partner and now has less of a partner. and I'm taking probably a sick leave for some months. And so this is a big change for the organization, the board, and especially for Shelly. So this things changing on a dime. Anything can happen anytime. We all kind of know that. I've mentioned a few times this wonderful evening that Joseph Goldstein did with the head of the Barry Center for Buddhist Studies, who interviewed Joseph about his late arrival, I think maybe in his mid-70s as a poet. I mean, I think maybe he played around a little bit before, but he got a little bit more serious in his 70s, and now he's getting close to his later 70s. And I think it's really part of his life. And so they did an evening, and he shared a poem I just mentioned briefly. It's called the Niagara River, I believe. And we know we're on the Niagara River. I'm just paraphrasing, but we forget what that means, the Niagara Falls. And so we all kind of intellectually know that anything can happen anytime, but we forget what that means. It means anything can happen anytime. And it's hard for our heart to stay open. We have a sort of a predictive heart that is just going to predict the next moment based on how things have been. And it's hard to kind of keep that wide open. And who knows? and who knows, and who knows, and who knows. So I wanted to open the talk just about that, like an invitation that I'm inviting myself to take and inviting anybody else who wants to come along. It's really an invitation to karma, and we don't talk that much about karma because it's often misused, as what we deserve, but it's just kind of the flow of causes and conditions, lawful. But lawful doesn't mean that you or I or anyone personally deserves what is unfolding for them. It just means it's unfolding for them lawfully because of innumerable, undeniable causes and conditions. Doesn't mean it's fair. It just means it's how it is. And when Pricky, the other co-founder of Common Ground, one of our main Dharma teachers at the center, was listening to a talk by Ajahn Sushito and mentioned, he said that instead of thinking that we live our lives flowing through time, it would be better to think we flow through karma, or maybe better even, karma flowing through us. Like here is this sensitive, tender heart when we let it be, and there's this never-ending flow movement of karma. And it's just a question of what are we going to do with that tender, sensitive heart? Are we going to wall it off? Are we going to see if it's capable of receiving and allowing and opening and really submitting to whatever shows up? And of course, you know the answer, right? We have so much conditioning. I have so much conditioning that it's not okay to feel. It's not okay to be this vulnerable. It's not okay to not be in control. And, some of you know me relatively well. Some of you know me very well. So you probably put me in the controlling type category. I'm at least on my outward personality, I'm sort of got that managerial, get things in place. I'm pretty watery underneath, but it's pretty strong on the surface, that kind of managerial side. And I remember I was telling Shelly and Stacy and Wynn and some of my other dear ones in my lives over these last weeks, some of my fears, as a young teenager and young adult, is just kind of getting trapped in in that sort of mentality of everything in nice little boxes and organized, and so I always had this sort of part of me that, some people might call it even a death wish, or just there's got to be something more. Don't want what's ordinary. And just where do you find that in our lives? How do we find a way out of the constrictions of our conditioning, our habits, to not want to feel, to not want to be vulnerable, to change? So the question, is really, how does our practice help us? How does the Buddhist teachings, being present with our experience, help us? And I think one of the main aspects of what we call wisdom and awareness, or mindfulness, our practice, which is just opening. We don't actually, it's more about what we don't do, right? Like right now, if we practice, it just means, like Shelly was saying in the guided meditation, it just means we're willing to receive what's already here. It's already here. It's already the way it is, this moment. So it's not like we need a technique even, although we do have techniques, but it's simpler than that. The techniques are actually there to remove bad habits. They're not actually needed, the mindfulness techniques, the meditation techniques. They're removing the habits of distraction. I was mentioning to Shelly this morning when we had our staff meeting, article by one of the senior Bhikkhunis, Buddhist nuns. She studied with Sayadaw Pandita and then eventually took full ordination. She has a monastery near Ottawa in Ontario, Canada, Aya Mendanandi, and it's the Dharma of Snow is the article. It was in Tricycle maybe 8 years ago, something like that. And she just mentioned a time, up north, I guess about as north as we are. They, in April, they had a lot of snow and they did some work in the morning, but by the afternoon, the snow was gone and they were kind of amazed. And one of the nuns mentioned that to one of her relatives who was a geophysicist. And he explained that although snow was there, it's been melting, melting, melting for days. And then there's a kind of a sudden collapse. And in this article, she uses that as a kind of a metaphor for our practice, where so much of our practice is where we, experience the difficulties in our life, experience all the different ways that things aren't going the way we want them to be. And we try all the strategies to get back into control, to be in charge. And there's something about planting the seeds of awareness and wisdom, like just being open. There's something that's initially it seems misleading, like how could this be helpful? This is why it's so important to have these testimonials. I've been practicing, basically every day since 1982. So a long time now. And it's been the main part of my life since, 84. It's really been the central thing in my life. And it was so nice to be in the middle of that storm. It's still kind of in the middle of the storm. And because that's when you really see the effects of the practice. The Sutta study groups at Common Ground were reading Ajahn Chah's collected teachings, and he asked the question, what does the eye of Dhamma see? What does the enlightened heart see or experience? It's a really important question. And we could all probably write a good answer for that question. Wisdom sees the way it is, or wisdom sees that everything comes and goes and we get an A on our quiz. But the real answer, like what does wisdom see? Wisdom sees in a way that leads to a functional, actual, pragmatic release, the release of suffering. Subjective, actual, in the moment release. It's the experience of being free with the conditions as they are. And it doesn't mean that conditions aren't horrible or unpleasant or hard to bear. And it doesn't mean that your body doesn't flinch when they poke you with a needle or, when you vomit or whatever is going on with your body. It just means that the two things coexist, like that poem, a drop of dew the world, this world of do is a world of do. And yet, it's ephemeral. It's not much of anything. And yet, it touches my heart and I'm moved and I feel it. And I'm crying or I'm laughing or I'm doing a backflip or whatever. And I really like, for me, that is so conducive of faith, just that, just seeing that, that balance there in the midst of being so raw and vulnerable. Like it wasn't like a stance balance or peace. It wasn't like, okay, I got this. I got my Buddha Dharma and it's my rock and I'm not letting go. And I'm gonna chain myself to this rock and it's gonna protect me. That idea that there's something or someone that has our back is simplistic. There's a refuge, but the refuge is it isn't something you the refuge is something that's like it arises with the letting go, not with the grasping. I guess maybe is the way to say it. And that's the hard part of the practice. And that's why we practice opening instead of clinging as our practice, because there are various spiritual practices that involve some form of clinging, and like just even holding a meditation object can be a kind of clinging, where I'm holding this object in mind to the exclusion of other objects. But of course, that's just a temporary way to quiet the mind so that it's in a more receptive place. Yeah, so just to kind of review a little there, some of the things that I noticed, just as the fruit, because before they diagnosed what was going on, and if you want more details, you can go to the Caring Bridge site. But I was just in a lot of pain when I was teaching out at the Forest Refuge at IMS in Massachusetts. Just this really intense pain that I didn't really have any means to manage. And my body felt like it was betraying me, like, what the hell's going on? And pain, as some of you know, can be really debilitating and disheartening. It really affects one's mood and qualities of mind. And just to see the curiosity and just the willingness to be interested in it and to see the limitations of that interest. Like part of what interest leads to is being interested in this is related to aversion. And so like skillful use of distraction and how to not to have these fixed ideas that, oh, I just have to look at the pain. But how am I going to pragmatically, functionally keep the heart really aligned with balance? Let me read a little more from Aya Mendanandi's article that I mentioned earlier. This is the Dharma of Snow. To do this, we need to be able to feel our humanity, to feel our nature from the inside, not superficially, but from within, where the invisible factors of mindfulness, clarity, faith, energy, concentration, and wisdom can dismantle and dissolve years and years of diluted ways of perception, of relating to life. And by that, I think she's referring to that we think we know what we're doing. It's really this absence of humility. And then she writes, that's what this practice brings about. Given enough patience and diligence and surrendering to the process, it brings about a spiritual transformation. It's invisible. We don't know it right away, but after years we begin to see. We see the changes in each other. We see the changes in ourselves. It's quite remarkable. Just like the snow's been already heating up. This geophysicist that I mentioned, he said that the snow can actually be above freezing, but still there before it all just collapses. She continues writing, when you're sitting with different states of mind arising and it seems interminable, trust this process works. In some ways visibly, in other ways invisibly. Like the invisible melting of snow beneath the crust of ice, it does work if we keep putting in the causes and conditions for mindfulness to arise, for diligence to arise, for contentment and gratitude to arise, for generosity to be expressed, for concentration to be matured, for wisdom to manifest. The results will take care of themselves. They know exactly when it's time. Trusting in the practice is key. We need to trust and persevere with determination, and that involves giving up. And she goes on to talk about renunciation. And of course, she's a renunciate, a bhikkhuni, a fully ordained Buddhist nun. And but she says it's more than shaving your head, because they generally, at least once every moon, they shave their head, if not twice a month. But she says you got to shave your heart. And by that, I understand it to mean like we have to become interested, curious about what is my heart dependent on? What is it established in? What is it imagining is some kind of ground that is going to end up being a betrayal? And, like I had that, I was a pretty healthy person, pretty vibrant. I'm getting older, I'm 65, but generally speaking, pretty healthy. And all of a sudden, something happens. And now, in hindsight, there's some telltale signs, but basically, no clear, obvious thing that my health situation would dramatically change. And many of you know this sudden change. And yet, so much of what happens, and I noticed this even when I was in the middle of the worst of the crisis, and there's been so many difficult twists and turns with getting COVID in the middle of being immune compromised and other infectious diseases that have come along just because I have very little immune system right now. Even in the middle of all that, I notice my mind creating these scenarios as if I know what's going to unfold. And it's just so interesting to see how strong that pattern is about like painting a picture about, oh, this is probably how it's going to be. And then it becomes a kind of reality. And then the heart gets invested in that reality. And then it's a setup for betrayal again and again and again. So this shaving of the heart is like, just imagining, and as I'm doing, I'm really taking this time now as I take care of my body and maybe do a little retreat time, and can't be really in front of groups anyway. So it's a perfect time for some sick leave / retreat time, convalescing, maybe 2 to 3 months. Well, Shelly and I are working out the details with the board of directors. But it's a really good time to put things down and to really see what the heart is dependent on. Because it isn't until we do, these things show up in our life. And I kind of like to, I know it's a little magical thinking, but I kind of like to imagine that in some ways the world is conspiring, or nature conspires to foil all of our ideas about who we are and where we're going. That's in a way nature's job. Some of you know it's an old joke. How do you make God laugh? Make plans. And it's kind of a riff on that joke. It's like, oh yeah, we think we know. So the shaving of the heart is like, what would it be like to live knowing that we don't know? And it's not just that we know that we don't know, because there can be some arrogance in that too. It's like we don't even know what we don't know. I don't know if that helps, but it's like to somehow really get to the how wide open, how nothing may be as we imagine it to be. All of this, now in psychology and philosophy and even in neuroscience, we're hearing more about this in sort of Western circles, which has really been there in the East for a long time. It's a mind-created world. And you don't need to believe that, but it is good to be open to that possibility. And being a mind-created world, it just begs the question, well, what if the mind just for a moment ceased creating the world? What would that be? What would that experience be? This, as we say sometimes in Buddhist practice, the cessation of existence, the putting down of what needs to be put down. People like the part that, well, then you can pick it back up, but you'll be free. But when we let things drop, I mean, even on that most simplistic level, and we notice we've been holding tension in our shoulders, and then awareness kicks in, wisdom and awareness, we realize my shoulders don't need to be up by my ears, and we release. We soften the belly, we release the squint around the eyes, around the mouth. Even that little like, oh, that felt nice, put down that load. Well, there might be a bigger load that can be released if we're interested. This is from Ajahn Chah. It's in a way in that chapter, in that wonderful collection, by the way, if anybody, it's available for free online, the digital copy, and the monasteries will send you a paper book if you want a paper book of it. It's a pretty thick volume of different monks and nuns and other lay people who are students of Ajahn Chah have collected all of his teachings that, he didn't write things down, of course, but they transcribed his talks over the many years he taught. It's in a beautiful volume, so I highly recommend. It's a really powerful set of teachings. It's called The Collected Teachings of Ajahn Chah. And you can just contact the office. Gabe Keller-Flores will help you get the link for that if you want to track it down. But one of the last chapters in the book, it's called Seeing, what the Dharma Eye Sees. Opening the Dharma Eye is the name of the chapter. And he kind of answers that question, what does the eye of Dhamma see? What does the eye of a person, free of greed, hatred, and delusion, a heart not grasping, what does that heart see or feel or know? So there is truth in this world, he writes or says. Trees, mountains, and vines all live according to their own truth. They are born and die, following their nature. It's just we people who aren't true. We see it and make a fuss over it. But nature is impassive. It's just as it is. We laugh, we cry, we kill, but nature remains in truth. It is truth. No matter how happy or sad we are, this body, it just follows its own nature. It's born, it grows up, it ages, changes, getting older all the time. It follows nature in this way. Whoever takes the body to be oneself and carries it around with them will suffer. But this is near the beginning of the year and new year rather. It's kind of good for all of us. Some of you have been practicing for decades. Some of you are relatively new with your awareness practice, your Buddhist awareness practice. It's kind of useful for all of us, as they asked the Buddha appropriately back 2,600 years ago, what are the fruits of practice? What actually comes from our practice? And so I have a few thoughts to kind of sum up with before Shelly and I open it to discussion and questions. But just some of the learnings, especially specific learnings in these last few months. One of the things that stands out is, and I mentioned this earlier, it's just all the false refuges in our lives. And we kind of, if someone were to question us, like I mentioned, about impermanence of the body or about aging, we'd have the right answer. Oh, I know I'm aging. I know eventually I'm going to die, or something like that. But are we actually regularly, intimately, do we have a real relationship with vulnerability? And how do we do that? Because it's not like we're not vulnerable now. Like you may be in perfect health, but we're vulnerable, all of us, to everything, to loss, to gain, fame, disrepute, praise, blame, right? We're just vulnerable. And what does it mean? How does that change how we relate to refuges? Like I'll give you an example just with this particular syndrome that I have, vasculitis, and it's in my lungs and my kidneys, and among other places, but that's the most serious places. And it affects my sense of taste in my mouth, and because my kidneys aren't working very well. And you don't realize until water and food is very unpleasant how dependent the mind has been, my mind, on the pleasantness and the treat of food. It's like that reward, that promise of eating and enjoying food. I had no idea what a role it plays in my life, just that satisfaction that I could count on. And I'm not a foodie, but I like food and preparing it and eating it and even talking about it and for that to just not just go away, but turn into something that was a burden. Like I had to eat because I needed to take care of my body. And it's just like, who imagines, as we live a normal life where that isn't interrupted, that the heart is dependent on that? And how do we shave that away, as Ayamindanandi suggests? Like, how do we creatively, not aversively, how do we creatively liberate our heart from its dependence on pleasantness without being mean-spirited or kind of a icy ascetic that wants to sleep on a bed of nails or something like that? That's just an interesting spiritual question, isn't it? Because we think when we have access to something like sense pleasure, like through food, we will fall into the habit of expectation, like, that's my privilege, that's my right, until it isn't. Some of you know that Wynn is out in New Jersey taking care of her mother, who just tomorrow is turning 96. And is in hospice and maybe in her last weeks, maybe even days. And just that, just that being that old and having a relatively graceful, really nice aging process, as nice as probably it can be for folks in terms of being loved and supported. But just that awareness of how much gets stripped away from hearing to eyesight to abilities to take care of your basic functions and all that letting go. Not, it's not always gradual like that. Sometimes it's sudden, but it's true for all of us, one way or another, that it's going to happen. So this is one of the powerful learnings for me, and this taste thing really stands out for me. That and the other piece of the thing that really makes it stand out is just how incredibly physically weak I've become. It's amazing. I was telling Shelly and others, like we have a wood stove and I have to get on my knees to put wood in the stove and just lifting the piece of wood, putting it in. But even getting up off of the floor, I mean, I have to really think about how I get up. And part of it is just having been in the hospital so long and just the combination of factors. And I mean, hopefully I'll rebuild. There's some decent probability that I'll be, able to kind of live a long and healthy life, relatively speaking, immune compromised to some degree, but odds, have changed for sure. And but still, this process of getting healthy again, it's going to take some time. So that was one thing, just this whole interesting thing about what the heart unconsciously is taking refuge in that isn't really dependable, and how liberating it is, painful, but how liberating it is for me to get a sense, oh yeah, that's not dependable. And I had all kinds of scenarios, I held them lightly, and a lot of you have heard me talk about, the kind of traditional Minnesota, getting a cabin in the North Woods and on a lake. But with this condition, probably not going to happen anyway. But, financially, probably not going to happen, but especially because of the health issues. And I mean, that doesn't mean I'm not going to go outside or anything like that. I'm not creating a sob story, but just these sort of ideas that we have of like, this will make me happy. This will be my ticket to peace and happiness. Well, maybe not so. Maybe peace and happiness doesn't depend on any particular scenario. So another thing, so that's one, just the betrayal of the liberating betrayal of things we thought were refuges unconsciously, but now get illuminated, not dependable. Another really powerful part of this process for me has been just the reframing of my relationship with complexity. I just had this partly conscious, but partly unconscious idea that complex systems like our medical system and pharmacology, Western pharmacology, it's like, I'm somebody probably for the last 30 years, short of the last 2 or 3 months, so not counting those months, I probably have taken 10 ibuprofen over the last 3 decades, maybe, if I'm lucky. No, and Tylenol, ibuprofen together. So I don't do much. I mean, a few vitamins, but even vitamins, supplements, I don't really do much of that stuff. I just try to eat healthy. And I, avoid medical systems, and I've been lucky, obviously, and we're fortunate. And part of it was this, maybe it's related to maleness a little bit, who knows, but just this idea of independence and, I'll figure it out on my own and that kind of mentality. But the combination of entering this incredibly bureaucratic, complex system, and it's saving my life. And and reading this wonderful book that Win now, my partner, is reading, called An Entangled Life by Merlin Sheldrake. Some of you might have seen, I think it's like it was in the bestseller list in the New York Times. He's a scientist, a fungologist. I'm not sure that's the right word, but studies fungi, and it's all about fungi, of course. And but this whole world that, of course, because it's subtle, we are just learning about now. But of course, it makes up our world, inside, outside, everywhere. Our neurology sort of mimics fungology in some ways. And it's just a fascinating book. And that, and my relationship with the medical system, and just all the love pouring in, and going from that sort of managerial, fatherly person in charge to somebody who needs care, a lot of it. And just like, oh, being part of the village, and it's a wild village, and the neat thing about this study of fungology and the whole mycelium networks, it's, we want to paint a picture, we want to put a story like, oh, it's altruistic and everybody's sharing, and there is some of that, but it's also competitive, and it's also aggressive, and it's everything. It's wild. It's nature. It's alive. It's changing. It's causes and conditions. It's what we call Dharma. And I'm really changing my relationship to, like, I was a subtle, unseen aversion to that truth of life, which is like, when we shut ourselves off to something, we're shutting ourselves off to life. And that's dukkha, that's suffering, that's stress. So just to begin now, to make space. And in some ways, this taking some time off, and yielding my role as someone with a role and status for a few months, and things to do. And it's really powerful for someone like me who, I didn't know much, but I knew that doing my practice and supporting other people's practice was a good thing. And so I just did that. And I didn't do much else for, the last 30, 40 years. And I'm looking back and don't have any misgivings, but it's really nice to explore the non-dependence on that. And that for me is quite interesting and radical even. And I was saying to a good friend of mine, former board member, and a couple people I've been talking to, just this, for someone, I've been practicing a long time, and you get good at sort of, not that fear doesn't come up, but I know how to work with the fear that comes up. But it's nice when fear comes up that has some stability, like, well, that's interesting. That fear hasn't been fully explored yet. And so there's some nice edges for me in that place of, that just the unknown and putting things down. And it doesn't mean I'm not going to pick things up. I fully expect, but who knows? I'm not, but I, fully expect to be teaching in a few months and back in the saddle in different ways. Things will change a little bit, maybe more distance between me and the people in front of me. And we'll think it through. And it depends, of course, on my health and how things unfold with my condition. But prognosis could be quite fine in a few months, in terms of continuing with a lot of my duties that I had before. But I'm also 65, and Common Ground's in a different place. And so it's just a really interesting time, and probably a good time to ask Shelly, because not only has this been a dramatic time for me in this, well, let me just mention one more thing. There was one more important thing I wanted to mention about just learnings before I pass it to Shelly. And that's just this, and some of you know, if you listen to my talk during the retreat, and I don't know if people caught it in the Sunday morning, on the 31st of December, I taught on Sunday morning because Shelly couldn't get back from the retreat center because of the freezing ice out there. So I Zoomed in and taught both for the Zoom and the in-person community. And but I was on the verge of tears probably 5 or 10 times during that talk. I mean, I held it together, but I have become so raw in a good way. And not that I wasn't always raw, but it's just, there's no boundary between tenderness and yeah, it's just that kind of feeling touched and moved by everything. And it's indiscriminate, it doesn't matter. Everything moves me. Somebody will come to mind and I'll just want to sob. And I so appreciate the heart's capacity to, yeah, just to be that, to feel that much and to have that much moving through it. And how that doesn't have to be in any way incongruent with balance and peace and clarity. That the wildness and the unformed, that they somehow, I don't know how, but they can coexist. And I somehow feel like that for me is just a really powerful new place. Wonderful place that I'm really looking forward to exploring and sharing with all of us as I be Mark going forward. So before I pass it to Shelly, I just want to acknowledge, the love again from everyone and the great support from the board of directors, all of the teachers that have stepped up to support Shelly, Robin, Major, who's now on a long retreat, and Gabe Keller, who stepped into this managerial role at the center. We're so happy to have Gabe back in the seat, right in the middle of things, with always great competence and his deep Dharma. And especially Shelly, who's just, Shelly, besides being my co-guiding teacher, friend, she's also a teacher and mentor of mine, really powerful teacher and mentor. So I hope people understand that it's really all these overlapping roles that we have at Common Ground, but it seems to work, and really grateful for that. So Shelly, I ask you for the community, how has it been for you?
Well, it's been tenderizing for me too. Yeah, I feel I'm an emotional being. It's been the case for most of my life, so the tears aren't anything to be worried about, but mostly I feel grateful. It's been a real gift to be at home here at Common Ground and to have started my practice here and to now continue teaching in this way, sharing the guiding teacher role with you, Mark. And yeah, I've had such good training. I feel grateful for all of my teachers and especially for Mark here. I was just remembering when I was volunteering in the office, Mark encouraged me to touch the dana, look at it, feel it, to not be afraid, to just be a part of, all aspects of what it means to be in community and to be a leader in a community like this. And just one small example of just how I feel so rooted in being a student. And I don't always know what the next right thing to do is as a leader, but I do know how to be a student. And I know that, especially through this challenging time for Mark, that just being intimate with the way it is and not neglecting anything, anything that moves, just really being there for it has been powerful. And it's the way I want to continue to live. And when I feel like I can do that, then I feel okay. And so over the past couple months, I feel strong as a student, and I feel really happy to be supporting a community and to call Common Ground my home. So I feel good and real. Yeah.
Shelly, I was thinking maybe we should mention, because people may not know that they maybe just presumed you were full-time before,
Mm,
but Shelly is now working finally. We're so grateful, full-time at Common Ground.
yeah, that's
That's
right.
changed.
Yeah, so that's just as of this January. So for a while, I've been 3/4 time, and now I'm working full time, which, yeah, seems just right for me. Again, it's about just committing and being a student and letting the teaching and the leadership fall from there. And so I feel it feels just perfect for me to be giving my heart to Common Ground in this way. Yeah. And glad to be doing it with Mark. These these moments, like Mark's been sick and still really available and still teaching and being in relationship with me and other leaders at Common Ground and with the community. It's not, yeah, I feel like we've been a team and we've been doing this for a long time. So, Mark, in this transition of sharing the guiding teacher role and being colleagues, and in addition to being my mentor, and teacher, now being colleagues and friends, it's been in process for a long time. So, in some ways, I know I've gotten a lot of well wishes from the community, and I really appreciate that. And in many ways, things don't feel very different, because we talk a lot and we've been around each other a lot and can predict the way we think in a lot of ways and don't always agree on everything. And that's been a part of our relationship too. And there's so much love and respect and deep commitment to the Dharma that it just keeps moving forward. Yeah. So the transition to me doing more, it just feels like a natural movement. Should we take some questions? Yeah. So I'll facilitate this for us, and we're happy to respond to questions. It could be about Common Ground and the months ahead, programming, anything like that. Could definitely just be to Mark if you have questions about anything that he's offered tonight, the Dharma. Ask him now. And so let's see here. If you raise your virtual hand, yeah. Looks like Anne has their hand up.
Mark.
Hey,
Hi.
Ann.
I'm wondering if, as you were experiencing the tender heart and receiving present moment awareness of this illness and hanging in there as best you could, if any thoughts of God came to you, like the miracle of the tender heart, did that seem like it gave birth to a belief in some kind of a divine presence that's neither you? I don't know. I guess that's my question.
That's not how I would frame it, no. It's more organic. My lived experience is a little bit more organic. Like, because that would involve the mind conceptualizing, so I would use words like it's a felt, but the felt sense, it doesn't have a location, it's a spreading, a widening. and it doesn't need location. And that's what makes it a real refuge. That's why that tenderness is so trustworthy, is because it's it's more about what's being removed. The isolation is being removed. And that's what feels so good and so right. Not that the heart is going towards something that's good, but the idea of separation, the idea of aloneness is being removed. I hope that helps.
It looks like Tom has their hand up.
Hi, Mark. Hi, Shelly. Hi, everybody. Thank you for doing this. This means a lot. It's a wonderful thing to be able to check in as a community like this. I'm thinking of your point, Mark, about how even when we're blindsided by what comes around the next bend, we can still be peaceful and calm. And so I'm wondering, do you think in our practice we ever get to the point where we're really not surprised by anything? Because, well, I realize we're blindsided because we think we know, as you said, we think we know. And so when something happens that doesn't fit that understanding, we're blindsided. But do we get to a point, do you think, where we know so much, I guess, that we aren't surprised anymore by anything?
Yeah, but there's a point before that, Tom, where that's a very powerful point where we're peaceful and calm, and then some old pattern gets triggered, and we're not surprised that it gets triggered. Like some old ancient pattern that we thought we had already worked through, and we're just envious or jealous or acting out in a way we would never, ever want to act out. And there we are doing something stupid and embarrassing ourselves. And we're not that we're okay, not that it's the skillful thing to do, but there's peace with it. We take care of business, we own it, make amends. So before, our hot ship, or who knows, I'm not there, before somebody becomes, the heart has uprooted all tendencies, latent tendencies towards greed, hate, and delusion, there's a very powerful place where, and Aya Mendinati in this article talks about that, where you've been really practicing and yet things get triggered in you. And you're okay, because not being okay when it gets triggered isn't helpful. You work with it. Okay, I'm losing it. I acted out. I really hurt somebody. I did something stupid. Now what do? You don't make a huge thing out of having been unskillful. You're pragmatic. You take care of business. You do what needs to be done. So it's really about that non-harming piece, not about identity, like being the one who did something stupid. That's what gets dropped. Not that being stupid, that doesn't necessarily get dropped right away. And who knows if it actually ever gets dropped to the nth degree. Like you could imagine a Buddha, someone uprooted greed, hatred, and delusion. I mean, there's a story, it's a silly story in a way, but there was a fully awakened one doing his walking practice. He happened to be blind. So he was stepping on ants on his walking path, back and forth, doing his walking meditation. And all the younger monks complained to the Buddha, he's killing, and there's a precept against not killing. And the Buddha scolded them, well, you should tell them, he can't see, But the idea is that somebody might have some conditioning that didn't get illuminated for them, like patriarchy. And so you might go see a Sayadaw in Burma, in Myanmar, and they might, just from their own conditioning, have all kinds of patriarchal ideas of how women should behave in front of men. But that just may be their lack of experience. That doesn't mean that their heart isn't free. The question is, if that all gets pointed out, does their mind create suffering around it? Or scold you, or or do they rework the system and incorporate the new information in a seamless, frictionless way? Oh, so this is how it is, huh? Okay, let's go forward. Right. So perfection is really in the not making something more than what it is, not in this sort of outward, not looking like a fool. How about something for Shelly?
Well, there's a question in the chat here from Zinzile. Hi, Zinzile, if you're still here. Mark and Shelly, my beloved friends, what do you need from your community now? It's just already the question is a it's a beautiful offering. So just want to say thanks for that. And yeah, the community is just part of what makes it so easy to step up or step forward, is that it doesn't ever feel like Mark and I are doing this alone. It's just a whole community taking care of itself. So just continue to be a part of the community and to keep practicing the Dhamma and to keep being sincere about that. And the more we do that, the more we practice the Dhamma in community, we'll just recognize what true refuge really is, and it will show, and we'll all be impacted by that. So in any way that you express that, quality of being a student will feel good to all of us. So just the question itself feels sweet and is enough. Yeah. And if Mark and Wynn have needs, then somebody will articulate those in the Caring Bridge site. So they're not holding back because they don't want, because they want to. They're just, figuring things out day by day. And when they have needs, they'll let us know.
Yeah. And we have lots of family in town, brothers and sisters. So
yeah. All right, we'll go to Freda.
There I am. So I'm going to take something you said, Mark. This is not about your health situation or common ground, but and I'm not sure if I can find what you said exactly, but about being at peace with what's happening, and so one of the things that and I'm out in the world a lot. So one of the things that's causing me a lot of how to deal with it, how to try and have some impact is the whole situation of what's going on in Gaza right now. I keep hearing about near famine, potential famine, disease, and I'm Jewish, but it doesn't, I'm seeing suffering humanity. I'm seeing political stupidity in my mind. But so, and I did watch part of something yesterday where a Palestinian congressional staffer, somebody who's Palestinian background, he said, what you're doing, all your calls and everything, it is having an impact. So he's saying there is something to do. But so in that kind of universe of realities, how do you be at peace with that and also maybe continue to work with it?
yeah. Well, I think the first step is for us, each of us individually, to explore our relationship to what we're hearing and seeing. And like I have to be really honest with myself around my consumption of news and how I consume the news. And am I unconsciously or even maybe somewhat consciously traumatizing, like in some sort of unhealthy way, activating rage or activating whatever unhelpful emotion? Am I actually, the question I've been asking myself, Freda, is this good medicine at this time? Whatever I'm doing, listening, watching, thinking, is this good medicine at this time for this heart? And this heart isn't different than this heart, the totality. Is it actually productive what I'm doing? Is it actually helping the people in Gaza or anybody, what I'm doing? What can I do now that's at least helping somebody here, there, anywhere? So it's really around this non-harming. It's really about taking Sila up seriously. Sila, if you don't know, is the Pali word for this whole valuing of non-harming, and it's central to our practice. It's 1/3 of what we do is caring about non-harming, and how we centralize that in our Dharma practice is really, and it's okay if it's very local and we're taking care of this body in this moment, or it's service out in the world, but there's always something we can do. Wash the dishes in the sink. That I know needs to be done. The birds need more bird seed. And we can add one positive thing, plant one seed, drop by drop by drop by drop, the world gets changed. I'll send some money to Doctors Without Borders. I'll write this letter to my congressperson. But just do one thing and feel that what comes from doing that one thing. And release the idea of figuring out what the right one thing to do is. And just do things that you feel in your own heart body, that was a good thing to do. How do I know? It feels good to have done it. Thinking about doing it felt good. Doing it felt good. Having done it feels good. Shelly often recites that sutta from when the Buddha was teaching his younger son, Rahula, who was a novice monk, to reflect before, during, after actions of thought, speech, and deed. And it's amazing how much happiness we would have if we didn't do any other kind of meditative stuff, but all we did was get interested in planting, like one moment, do something that we feel in our bones is good. And then, okay, now next moment, what can I do that has some positive value for me or others? Okay, now what? Okay, now what? I'll go pet the cat. That has some minimal, but some positive value. Now what? We'd have a different world. Shelly, did you want to
Sure.
weigh in on that?
The only thing that came to mind, in addition to what you shared, Mark, was just that really the world, we can look out at the world and we each have our mind habits that inform the way in which the mind views anything. And we can look out the world and most definitely see all of the challenges and all of the problems, but it's a radical thing to actually notice what's good in the world too. So just that tuning into how the heart is seeding goodness and how other people are seeding goodness too shifts the mind's capacity to be with anything, and it actually feels like undermining that sense of that oppressive feeling that's there, to touch happiness or goodness in the face of any challenge. So, and it can be small. I certainly have learned this over the past few years in my life too, that, hearing the bird song, can be a bit of sweet goodness that supports the heart's connection with anything. Yeah. And it looks like there's a question from Lisa in the chat for you, Mark. In light of what seems like a scary health situation for you, can you say more about letting the feeling of isolation, loneliness be, or letting it go?
It's not so much, we use that word letting go, but sometimes it's good to change it to letting be. And Joseph talks a lot about this in his poetry. I mentioned Joseph Goldstein kind of exploring poetry, and that idea of aloneness, like reframing it in a positive way. And, a lot, Shelly and I talk a lot about community and the power of community, even in these stranger Zoom hybrid worlds that we now inhabit in our Dharma communities. And, but we're doing a very personal or alone practice, but we can do it together. And it really, it works. But we have to have a relationship with that aloneness, because that is very much related to our experience of dukkha and isolation, like you said, and separation, and this, what in Buddhism we call self-view. And so we need to get interested in it. It's interesting, that sense of being alone, isolated, apart. And then what comes out of that is a strong, very strong need for belonging, which I'm not pathologizing any of that. It's just how it is. But it's a dynamic that we want to get interested in because it's real. It's so central to what we are, what we're feeling. And why wouldn't we want to get interested in that and relax with it? And we can't figure it out. There has to be enough safety for that aloneness, whatever we call it, to reveal itself. And like I said right at the beginning, it's not even that we don't know what it is. We don't even know I don't even know how to say it now, but it's like we don't even know how to imagine what it could be. Like we can imagine monsters, but we can't imagine the monsters we can't imagine. So we have to be really that open. So we're not forcing the monsters to look like the way we think they should look, or the scary stuff, because it may not look that way. We don't know what it looks like. That's the point. That's what Dhamma is. Dhamma is what we don't know what it looks like. Dhamma, real Dhamma, the way it is what we haven't yet opened to. What we've opened to is what we call delusion or samsara. That's what we know. Most of us, most of the time.
And it looks like there are a few people with hands up here. I don't know. We have about 5 minutes left. So maybe Lucy, since we read your question in the chat, we'll go to Gabriel.
Hi, thank you for holding this. I really appreciate it. I'm very interested in what you shared, Mark, about even as the impermanence and vicissitudes of life make themselves known and felt, we can have an idea of how things might play out or what we experience and find safety or refuge or some measure of understanding with the intent of controlling or bracing. And I've been thinking a lot about that in the relation with dukkha. Personally been experiencing a lot of turbulence and change and things that I thought were a certain way, maybe not being so, or shifting and connecting with impermanence. And I'm curious, with such raw, powerful shifts in experience and reality and conditions and such, how are you relating to the, like wanting things a certain way or clinging to some sense of safety or stability? I think maybe the essence of my question is I've found this notion of, as soon as things seem that they're a bit stable and you have an understanding and you're like, okay, this is what's going on, this is what I can expect, and here's my work, it seems, these big shifts come and destabilization. And I've started to try and be like, well, maybe the stability is just not trying to find stability. But earlier today I saw that some idea that the work is not tolerating distress and uncertainty, it's like finding peace and feeling. So yeah, just wondering what your experience with that has been.
Yeah, beautiful question, Gabriel. we could practice that and talk about that for a long time. Really, there's so much there. And I've been thinking right along some of those lines. And there's kind of different phases that what comes to mind, because we need to wrap it up soon. So I'll just share this piece that came to mind recently, which is when we're experiencing feeling all the time, things are moving, like you're saying, sometimes challenging stuff moving through our life, whether it's emotional or whatever, circumstantial stuff flowing, moving, we feel it. We're sensitive, tender. We feel that river, that current of feeling and the desiring. All that is nature, natural, can't be stopped. It's a current. That's what it means to be alive. And then the sort of initial way the mind might want to deal with it is like, that's happening to me. I'm feeling something, so I'm going to react to it. And then, but we can at some point get a sense of there's a choice, like, how do I want to feel about what I'm feeling? And it's sort of like there's a feeling, but there's a way of participating in, because part of feeling is understanding what the feeling is. Understanding what feeling is changes the experience of feeling. And this is the participation. Like, you remember at the beginning of the talk, I talked about that karma's moving through us, or we're moving through karma, right? And in a way, that's just causes the conditions. That's part of what's just happening to what we call this sensitivity, me. And the question is, what do we do with that experience? And we can participate. And part of the way to participate is to explore the possibility of just letting it move. But that's going to be the last possibility we're going to explore, generally speaking, even with good teachings and teachers, because we're going to want to explore getting on top of it or managing it first and directing it towards beautiful states, wonderful places, protected, safe spaces. But at some point we'll get interested, we'll realize, even if we get really competent at kind of managing what we do with feeling, well, hey, sweetheart, not now. At some point we'll realize it'd be just nice to let everything rip, just let everything move. And there's that intuition towards letting nature, which is everything, be nature, and dropping this idea of existence. And it sounds scary from the point of view of me, but it just is a natural, inevitable result of the practice. Because what practice does is it develops sensitivity. And sensitivity will expose what's being held that doesn't need to be held. And letting go happens from that. And then the heart realizes what can be let go of. And until it lets go, it doesn't realize it can let go of that. That's the surprise. Oh, Shelly, should we leave it here?
We should probably leave it here.
Do you feel
Thanks
like doing a closing blessing, Shelly?
Yeah, I'd be
See my
happy to.
voice?
Yeah. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. It's been real sweet to be together. Let's just dedicate the merit before we depart. We can just appreciate the goodness that flows through this community and all the learning that's taken place here tonight. And we can trust the movement of that learning and how it will just spill out of us naturally in its own ways, in its own time. And we can dedicate the good that comes from our practice, from our lives, dedicate the merit back to all our friends and family, to Mark and Wen as Mark continues his healing, and Wen supports Mark and is there for her family during this tender time of passing away of her mother. And then letting that goodness move and expand in any way, any shape, any form, touching all beings without exception. May all beings know peace, may all beings know freedom. See you soon, friends. Lots of love.
Lots of love, everyone.